Hey Threadheads, Darren here. Welcome back to another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tying a pattern called the Bleeding Prawn, and in particular this color variation is called the Evening Storm. This is a Steelhead fly by Bjorn Beech. He's a productive pattern designer and the owner of the Fly Fisher. It's a fly shop in Lacey, Washington. There's a few other color variations of this pattern, including the Red Moon, the Alcan Express, which is like a black and blue variation, and a Victoria's Secret Pink. Of course, that's a pink and light colored variation. There's also a couple others, and this is a very similar pattern to the stinger prawn, which is an articulated version of this fly, I think. Some of the other patterns that Bjorn is known for are things like the jumbo critter, the stinger prawn, and the overdressed hooker. Don't forget to leave a comment down below and I'll get you entered into the next draw for stickers and some of the flies we tie in the channel. Let's have a look at the material list and get started. Alright, let's get a fresh hook into the vise. So for hooks today, I'm going to be using a Superfly heavy steelhead and salmon, but I've just recently heard these aren't going to be available for much longer, so I recommend something like a Tiemco 7999. It's a nice sturdy hook for this application. For thread, we're going to be using a 6/0 fire orange uni. If you don't have the uni, you can use a 140D ultra thread, or even a 70D works well for this. You just put a base layer of thread on there, starting behind the eye down to the hook bend. And now we're going to take a little bit of this orange bucktail. We're going to cut out a small clump. We want this to have a little bit of length. We're going to typically want this to extend out the back of the hook by about 2 hook lengths, shank lengths. So we can just kind of even up those tips just a little bit. You can do that by hand, or you can put that into a hair stacker if you wish. I like to do it by hand. It makes it a little less neat, kind of gives you a bit more of a natural looking taper. And we'll just measure that out to about 2 lengths of the hook shank, and then we'll tie that down. Give it some loose wraps near the back so it doesn't flare a whole lot, and as we go forward we will tighten down those wraps just to make sure it's really secured in there. And then once we get down up to about just before the eye, we'll trim off any of those longer hairs. But I like to do this just to kind of keep the underbody nice and smooth on the fly. So we'll just go ahead and we'll add a few more wraps to kind of clean that up. For flash on this fly, Bjorn states he uses 10 strands each of gold flashabou and red crystal flash. So I'm changing that up a little bit. I've got this mottled gold flash flashabou, and this is from the Hedron. They have a few different colors. They have a gold, a bronze, and a silver. I really like these mottled looking flashy gold or metallic colors. They're pretty sharp, I think. So I've just doubled 5 strands over so that we have a total of 10. If you have a little bit extra, you can save that for your next fly. And I'm going to do the same thing with the red crystal flash. I'm using a metallic crystal flash here. You can use a crystal, a pearl dyed red instead. I like the metallic red. It gives a little bit more solid color. I tied the gold on top of the hook shank, so I'm going to tie these on the side just to distribute that flash a little bit. So we get a little bit on different sides of the fly presenting. So again, I'm going to tie that in halfway, and we're going to double that over and pull it along the far side. And again, that's just 5 strands doubled over for a total of 10. So for the next material, we're going to use a little bit of ultra chenille, and I've got some orange ultra chenille for this variation, and we're going to tie that down. Again, we want to keep that body even, so I'm going to tie that down near just behind the eye. I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of room for the wing, the marabou that we're going to tie in on the front. So just do loose, not quite touching wraps, a little bit open, just to make sure that's secured. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to just wrap that. We want to make sure it's somewhat dense as we're wrapping it. And just in touching turns, you can kind of push it back a little bit as you wrap, just to make sure that you get a dense and an even body with the ultra chenille. And when we get up to where we left our thread off, we'll go ahead and we'll just add a couple turns of thread just to secure that, and then we'll trim off the excess. And different variations of this, they'll be using different colors of chenille. And this is sort of an underbody, and it's not really visible when the fly is wet, but as it's pulsing through the water, you'll get glimpses of this. We'll just add a couple wraps of thread just to clean up and secure that end. And then we're going to start on our marabou wings. So for the first color, I'm using a fluorescent fire orange on this one. I think the original Evening Storm just calls for an orange hackle, but I like the color of this. I'm just changing it up again, just a little bit, just to match my preferences. And we're just going to strip away some of the fluff at the bottom and create a tie-in point on the tip of that fly, on the marabou rather. We'll tie that in, fold the tip back, wrap over it a couple times, trim the tip off. Then we're going to grab the back of the stem and run our scissors along the top edge of that feather. And then we've got everything sweeping back, and we're going to palmer that forward. So every time we wrap the feather around, we're just going to grasp all the fibers, pull them backwards. That'll help you get a nice sweeping appearance over top of the body. And this helps kind of build up a bit of a teardrop shape when the fly gets wet. Gives it a little bit of body. We'll tie that off after a few wraps. And we'll make sure we trim away that excess stem. Now we're going to select our second color. So we're going to use red for this. The original calls for a fluorescent red. I should also mention I'm going off the pattern that's found in Randall and Mary Kaufmann's book, and the pattern seems to be a little bit incomplete. I'm not sure if I'm reading it wrong, but the picture and the pattern listing don't exactly match, so I'm doing a little bit of speculation on this in the final color of the wing here. So again, we'll make sure that we sweep back. I'm going to tie this over top of the orange. We'll pull all the hackle fibers back. Make sure you got some room to wrap forward. And we want to, when we're wrapping this, we want to basically do touching turns of the marabou. So we wrap forward. You don't want to trap any of the fibers down if you can help it. And just kind of make sure you pull everything back every time you wrap. If you find that you're trapping some of the fibers, you can take a brush to this later on and just to kind of comb out any of the trapped fibers. And I like to just go over the base of the stem a little bit, just so that fly's a little bit more durable in case it does get a sharp tooth or something. So for the last color here, we're going to use a black, and I'm not 100% sure that's the correct color. It might have been a purple that was used on the original, as there is the red moon, which is a red and black variation of this fly. But even so, just know that this is my interpretation of it, I guess. So we're going to use a black here, and again, we're just going to prepare that feather the same way by stripping off the bottom fibers of marabou, tying it in by the tip, and then we'll trim that tip off. And again, we'll run our scissors along that top edge just to kind of help fold everything backwards. And we'll grasp all the fibers and give a few wraps of that feather. And we can take our thread right up behind the eye right now, and we can wrap up to that. Then we'll tie back over the marabou a little bit, just to make sure that it's secured by more than just the stem. And you can fold this stem back just to give it a little bit more security. Just know that it's not going to slip out. Trim that off. So we're almost done this fly. The last material that we're going to add to this is just a little bit of golden pheasant. And we're going to take some of the plumage from a normal golden pheasant. And this is just the red plumage. And I'm using a few, I'm going to use 2 of the longer feathers here. And we're just going to stick that in on top. That kind of gives it a bit of a balance, I guess. And just kind of helps the fly ride a little bit. We want to try and get that right down the center if we can. And I like to just pull that through the eye on the first one at least, and just make sure that it's really secure. The pheasant plumage is a little bit hard to tie because these stems aren't flat or completely round. I think they're a little bit more triangular than, say, a chicken hackle. So they can be a little bit tricky to set them straight. We're going to add a second red feather on here, and we're just going to set that on top of the first and just make sure that it's secured. And I'm not going to wrap this one around the bottom. Don't want that to get too thick in there, get the head of the fly too thick. Just add a few tight wraps. We'll go ahead and cut that off. And then we'll take a few extra wraps just to clean up the head. And just before you add your whip finish, make sure that that top golden pheasant is positioned the way you want it before it gets locked into place. And we'll add a 10 turn whip finish and trim the thread. And there you go. That's the Evening Storm variation of the Bleeding Leech. Hey fly tiers, thanks for stopping by and checking out my fly tying videos. If you enjoyed the video and want to show your support, hit the thumbs up and share it to your social networks. I hope you consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, be sure to hit the bell icon to get notifications on my latest fly patterns, tips, and reviews. If you have a question or comment, leave a message below. You'll also be entered into the next draw for some of the flies I tie and a few stickers. Until next time, this is Darren saying, keep a hook in your vise. Cheers.